Welcome back to TechNet Radio. The Microsoft Research Connections team joins us for today's episode as Dr. Kristin Tolle and Chris Wendt walks us through the debut of the Microsoft Translator Hub. Tune in as they discuss what it is, how it works, as well how it's powered by Windows Azure and Windows HPC clusters, and what its impact is and how we communicate with each other on a global scale. Blaine, the mic is yours.
Hello and welcome to IT Time. I'm your host, Blaine Barton, a Senior IT Pro Evangelist here at Microsoft in my Tampa studio here in sunny Florida. And with me today I have two special guests on IT Time, Dr. Kristin Tolle. How you doing, Kristin?
Good, thank you.
Good. And Chris Wendt. How you doing, Chris?
Very well, thanks a lot.
Welcome to the show. So I'd like to start with Kristin first. You're the Director of Natural Interactions in the Microsoft Research Connections team. That's correct?
Yep, that's right.
And a clinical associate professional at the University of Washington, famous University of Washington Huskies. I am a Cougar from Washington State University, but can't we all just get along? So great. Since joining Microsoft, Dr. Tolle has acquired several patents and worked in several product teams, including Natural Language Group, Visual Studio, and Excel. Prior to joining Microsoft, you were a research associate at the University of Arizona Artificial Intelligence Lab, managing a team of researchers working on medical information retrieval and natural language processing. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
In your areas, it looks like you have included in your research global public health, contextual computing, natural language processing, and machine translation, mobile computing, which is a hot topic these days, user intent modeling, maybe you can talk about some of these, and the democratization of medicine. So we'll get to a couple of really specific questions for you, but I'm going to turn it back over to talk about Chris for a minute. Chris is a principal group program manager in research for machine translation. Went to the University of Hamburg, Germany, and subsequently spent a decade on software internationalization of a multitude of our Microsoft products, including Windows, of course, Internet Explorer, MSN, Windows Live, bringing those products to market with equal functionality worldwide. Since Chris joined Microsoft, since 2005, he is the leading the program management and planning for Microsoft Machine Translation Development, responsible for being translator, which is cool, and Microsoft Translator Services. And you're based in the headquarters in Wendt. So great, Chris, great, Kristin. Let's move back to Dr. Tolle. I have a question for you.
All right.
It's a special question. It's a question I always ask my guests when they join IT Time, and that was, tell us all what your first computer experience was.
I started out actually as an undergraduate, and I thought I was going to become an accountant, and I decided that was really terribly boring. But as going through that program, I was forced to take a computing class, and I was just so thrilled with the fact that I had so much control over a system that I went on to get my bachelor's in science and then my master's of science and even a PhD. I just never stopped.
That's great. You seem to be very knowledgeable in all the different artificial intelligence stuff, running the lab, managing a team of researchers. That's pretty neat. Can you tell me, like, your first computer experience, and then, like, how did you get started in IT? What brought you to all of this?
Well, because I was already in accounting and just taking computing classes that were in association with it, I really got a very firm grounding in business computing. At the same time, I played around in the evening with hacking. And so what ended up happening is I got caught, which means I wasn't obviously as good of a hacker as I thought I was, and got suspended from using any internet-connected system for a year. But at the end of it, they hired me on as their computer systems operator at the university.
Wow, what a story! That's I don't know if that's great or not, but it kind of leapfrogged you right into your career and all the wonderful things that you've done in your career since then.
Yeah.
So, back over to Chris. What brought you into, what was your first computer experience, and kind of what brought you into IT?
Oh, and I'm afraid to answer that because it dates me. If I tell you what my first computer was, you know how old I am, or when I got started in this. So my first computer was a Sharp MZ80A. I bought it just out of a whim. It was affordable. At the time, that was way before the IBM PC or the PC area as we know it today. And it didn't have any mass storage except for a tape drive, and I started out programming little games in BASIC, which was built into the device, and that's what you could do. So, and I traded them with my friends, and they wrote little games, and that was kind of the activity that one did with these PCs, other than automating different home control activities or managing your recipes or something like that. We didn't talk about connections that they were all standalone, and it was not exactly connectable to anything. And programming games was really a fun activity, but I grew out of it pretty soon. But that was the reason for me to decide that I didn't want to pursue a career in law or diplomacy. That was my target up to then before. And decided computers, that's what I wanted to do. And I upgraded to a new machine pretty soon after that. It was an Apple II clone, and I couldn't afford the real one, so I bought an Apple II clone. They didn't work very well, these Apple II clones. So you needed to reboot really frequently. That's how it grew. I pretty soon I decided then to study computer science, and that firmly embedded me in the field. Of course, you can notice that English isn't my first language. And so coming here to Microsoft, I pretty much quickly zoomed into working on internationalization, making our software work across language and country boundaries. And that's a very interesting field, and that's something where Microsoft is traditionally good at, and well, I'm still there.
I think that's fantastic, and especially when we're talking about localization of the languages, of all the different products that we have, all the documentation, all the bits and bytes, being able to be in the German version of Windows, and being able to make a change in Active Directory and have it show up in English on the other side. I mean, the integration of all these different bits and bytes and how they interrelate is it's quite amazing. So I'm very pleased to have both of you on this show today. We're going to talk about Microsoft Translator Hub, translation. I guess I'll just open it up for the first question to either one of you, Kristin or Chris, whoever wants to take this one. What is the Microsoft Translator Hub, first of all, and why is it important to us?
Yeah, I talk about Microsoft Translator in general at this point. So Microsoft Translator has been available as a web service for a while. Simply what it does, you give it a piece of text in one language and you get it back in another language. That's really the whole secret to the service. We have a bunch of our own UI on top of that. If you go to Bing Translator, for instance, you can just type some text and have it, or copy and paste it and get it translated. You can use the functionality from within Office, from within Link, within MSN Messenger. You can use it on third-party sites like Facebook, for instance. You can have your messages or can see the messages posted by other people in a different language. You can see it in your language. And Facebook, for instance, and all these applications, they use the Microsoft Translator API. And the API does the basic functionality that I just described. You give it a string in one language, and it translates it into a different language. If you have used any of these services before, you know that the translations aren't perfect. they are automatically generated based on machine learning technology that we have implemented on our site that learns from existing translated material. It will generate a set of mappings out of that. Is all statistically and probabilistic. So the more you read, the more confidence you get that a certain translation is good. And obviously, we can translate commonly used phrases and words very well, and the rarely used ones not so well. You would imagine that at one point everything that can be said has been translated. That's by far not true and not the case. People come up with new things to say stuff all the time, and it's very rare that you hit something that has been said before exactly again. So you need to have these systems that can deduct knowledge from existing translations and translate something that hasn't been seen before into any of the languages that are at this time supported. So the translator supports 37 languages today, and the number of languages grows all the time as we get new material that we can train the system on available to us, and then we'll feed it to the machine learning algorithms, and they'll learn how to translate. Not as good as a human who is able to speak these two languages, but I haven't really found a human who can translate 37 languages between any of the two perfectly well.
Yeah, it's amazing now. I've used the tool actually on MSN, and it's even to just do it as quickly as it does. Even when you're talking about double byte characters like kanji or some of those languages, it's amazing. It really is. And I know you guys keep perfecting it and putting all those very, very smart people behind the engines to optimize its algorithms, etc. So it's phenomenal. Yeah. So Kristin, tell me, we kind of know. I mean, obviously there are obvious benefits here of the Microsoft Translator Hub and how it translates from one language to another. But what's this built on? What's the power behind the energy and the computing power that presents all this information?
Yeah, what's really unique and interesting is the new system that we're coming out with, Microsoft Translator Hub, is that it enables that kind of customization that Chris is referring to happen for any language. To date, we've actually built all of the language models that we had produced to date for the first 37, but we now actually have a hub-enabled language that's Mongdao. And that has been enabled by the fact that we created what we call a community portal. So this means that under-resourced languages and language communities that currently don't have access to automated translation can build their own translation models. So they upload their data, they can link their small data to our big data that's in Microsoft Translator and create a really robust translator system for their language. And it all happens in a private workspace where they can improve that system, crowdsource that system in their community, and then eventually release that system when they're ready, not when some big company decides that they're ready.
So what's this powered by? Is it Windows Azure? What's the back end? I mean, what kind of products are we using on the back end?
Yeah, so it is a web service powered by Azure, and it's available in the cloud from anywhere in the world, which also means that it can work for all kinds of communities as long as they have access to the internet. On the back end, we actually build the language models on a high-performance computing cluster here in Building 99 in Microsoft. So the beautiful thing about that is, a language community is not going to have an Azure server, and they're not going to have a high-performance computing cluster just on hand. So they're literally turning that sort of computing over to us, and we provide the compute power, and they provide the data, and together we build a language.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, and what perfect timing to show the power of the high-performance computing with that loud motorcycle engine.
Yeah, with a Harley.
I mean, it could have been a perfect timing thing for this show. So Chris, back to you. Question for you. Maybe you could answer a little bit more about some of the I spent 3 years internationally traveling for Microsoft everywhere but North America, and spent a good deal of time in airplanes going to India and China, and knowing if you're in Africa, some of the cultural differences there, cultural and language preservation, and kind of different things and meanings mean different things to different people. So how does the system, and how does this Microsoft Translator Hub deal with cultural aspects of the system?
All right, let me differentiate a little bit about Microsoft Translator and Microsoft Translator Hub. So the Microsoft Translator Hub is a set of features built on top of Microsoft Translator, the Microsoft Translator backend, which allows this customization for specialized domains and areas of language and style. And plus, it allows language communities to build up support for a new language that isn't supported yet. Microsoft Translator Service then is the infrastructure on how you use all of this. You can use Microsoft Translator with a generic language support that we provide. What we provide is doing a decent job on average content. It doesn't do a particularly good job on your type of content. If you want that, then you use the Microsoft Translator Hub. Tell us a little bit about yourself, or the more you tell us about yourself, the better job we can do. You tell us about yourself by showing us some of the material that you have translated before in your style, in your domain, using the terminology that you prefer. And once you have done that, you have adapted the system to your environment, to what you like to do, what you like to translate. And this is how we get the cultural sensitivity to your particular business or interest or area of specialization. Let me give you a couple examples of areas of specialization. That could be agriculture. It could be brewing, like to just appeal to your interest here. Or it could be automotive, or it could be computer technical. And in fact, the history of our team here is that we set out to help Microsoft translate its own stuff, its own software, its own documentation, its own blog post, its own KB articles, and so we built a system that is adapted to the Microsoft culture, how Microsoft says things in other languages, and that's not always a one-to-one translation. You can imagine that the word table, right? It can be a SQL table or the table that you eat on, and both would be they're probably translated in most languages differently, right? The table that you eat on and the table that sits in a SQL database, and in English it happens to be ambiguous, right? The word table, and you have these ambiguities all the time, and that's an aspect of human language that you can't argue or move away from. And so what these things do is, or what our system does, it looks at the context, how what are the words that are surrounding this particular word, like table, in the context that we're looking at. But that is in many cases not enough to look just in the near vicinities. You'll need to know more, and that's where Microsoft Translator Hub comes in, allowing you to tell us, hey, this is the stuff that I want to translate, and then the hub gives you a key that you pass into the very normal Microsoft Translator API at api.microsofttranslator.com, and it will refer to the learning that you have helped us to do before, and it will use that adaptation to give you a better translation than our generic service or a generic service would give you. And that's how we learn this stuff. Let me talk about the generic methodology a little as well. So you asked, how do you bridge the cultural differences and variations? It's all based on what humans did before. what we like as training material is something that got translated by a qualified human. And so the computer really doesn't invent much or doesn't invent anything here. Sometimes you think they invent stuff, but but in reality, it's not invented. It's based on what it has seen before, what a human has taught, not necessarily us, but has taught us via translating a document in the culturally appropriate way, and that's what we simply reproduce by guessing the right context and using the appropriate terms that a human has used before.
So, Dr. Tolle, I have another question for you that maybe you can answer. There's the Microsoft Translator Hub enables public participation in the creation of these types of models that you're working on, otherwise known as crowdsourcing. Maybe you can enlighten us a little bit about what crowdsourcing is and how do we make the Translator Hub even better?
Sure, I'd love to. Crowdsourcing really leverages the world to chip in, really, kind of, and take ownership of and participate in the developing of our language models. What we like to do is we like to really empower ownership inside of a language community so that they can actually build their translations directly in. Kind of to play a little bit off of what Chris was saying earlier, where he was talking about how language is never constant. It's always changing. In order to keep languages really vibrant, it's really to tap into the community so that we can keep building more and more recent, communication into the translator itself. It's the way to keep the translator more accurate, but it also allows the community to contribute their terminology, the way they like to say things, and have it change over time, and also creates a vibrancy around it. But, really, the methodology here behind it is just that, we could go out and scrape a bunch of data and work in a dark room and come up with a translation model. But instead what we're doing is we're allowing the crowd to participate in it. We're allowing them to really be a part of developing the model, deciding when it is ready even to deploy. And I think that's just a great story.
So Kristin, I have a question for you. You had mentioned earlier about cloud-based translation or using the cloud or the power of Windows Azure, our public cloud offering, talking about web accessible service using, say, standard Microsoft Translator APIs, HTTP, AJAX, ASP.NET, and SOAP interfaces, as well to a kind of a web page embedded widget, if you will. Explain a little bit more about how we're using our public cloud and Windows Azure to power the engines behind this Microsoft translation.
Yeah, what it allows us to do really is take information from all over the world. I mean, you can upload all kinds of information. So it's really the scenario it mostly enables is this globalization of knowledge. I mean, there's this huge knowledge base that's on the internet, and we get to tap into that and make that available in all these different languages. And you mentioned earlier in my bio that I work for the democratization of medicine, and that's kind of a misnomer, I admit, but ultimately what we want to do is we want to globalize medical information, really democratize it so that we all get the same level of health care. So as long as we have access to the cloud, our information is up there. It can be localized no matter where I am in the world so that doctors who are treating me have that information in their language and can treat me better. I mean, you can see the scenario playing out and being fully enabled by having it built on Azure.
So let's talk a little bit more about the futures, right? I mean, you guys have done guys and gals have done a fantastic job of translating a page, with the Bing translator, or being able to read it in different languages, 37 different languages. I mean, great, huge endeavor on this whole translation piece. What is the future going to bring us? If you can talk about it, and share about, maybe this is a better question for Chris, is what is it going to bring in the future? What's it going to bring us 3-5 years from now? Do we know?
Yes, we have a pretty good idea where we want to be. Otherwise, I wouldn't really be here if it was done already. I would work on something else. So no, and the other thing is so automatic translation is an area that is 50 years old, right? It started 50 years ago with an Russian to English translation system. That's one of the first known automatic translation systems that exists. 50 years, and we have made great advances since then. But it's far from being perfect. So getting better getting better in translation is our primary goal. And in fact, the Microsoft Translator Hub is an avenue down that road. If you tell us more about yourself, as I mentioned, we do a better job for your type of content, for your style. That is addressing the most apparent quality concern. Of course, we also like to make the generic language ability better. So if you assume a translator that is not trained in a particular area but knows the language well, they'll still do a better job than we do at this time. But I'd like to reduce the number of mistranslated sentences and phrases further and further. And doing that among an ever-growing set of languages is the next goal here, right? We cover 37 languages today, which is a very tiny fraction of the languages that are spoken on Earth. Right? Depends on how you define it, but I think a relatively good definition brings us to 7 languages that exist that are being spoken. 7,000. Did I say 7? I mean 7,000 languages spoken on Earth, and 37 is really small. It covers a pretty good portion of the population, but by far not enough in my view. And that's the other area that we are investing in, and that we want to bring to fruition. And the Microsoft Translator Hub gives us a good piece of the methodology by which we can achieve the goal of enabling communication between more and more people on this planet.
Absolutely. You start looking at just, like India alone with a couple hundred different dialects, right? And the different languages, reading, from the left to the right, or reading from the right to the left, or starting at the back of the book and reading to the front of the book, or the front of the book to the back of the book, and all these different ways in which we interpret a language and how we analyze and convert, if you will, complex, syntax, sentence structures, and things like that, even in English. So big undertaking. It's been just great interview today. Great episode.
Can I add one more topic?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mentioned better translation quality. I mentioned more languages. The other aspect, of course, is making this accessible to the people within the means of what is available to them, including the application that they are using, the operating system they are using, the device they are using. So we have spent some good amount of effort to making our API easy to use and universal. And we don't see it used exclusively through Microsoft's own application, but it's available to you. For your application, for your device. Doesn't even have to run a Microsoft operating system. We like that, but if you don't, that's also okay. And integrate our service and make it available to users within their workflow, within their activity, because translation is no help if it's not accessible to you.
Absolutely.
The other aspect here is that of course not all material that you want to translate is available in text form, right? So the next step here to take is interpreting speech and translating it into a different language to allow verbal communication.
That's amazing. It sounded like Dr. Tolle had something she wanted to add to that.
Oh, I was just saying, I mean, because this is a machine learning system, I mean, it can learn all kinds of natural language processing applications. Translation is one, speech is one that Chris just mentioned. I was holding up my phone. This is actually a third-party application that was developed called Polyglot on my Windows phone. But immediately this application got a new language added this week just simply because we added it. They didn't have to change their code at all. A new language gets added, and so there's more functionality in the APIs just automatically for our people who develop against them.
That's awesome. So pretty open there as far as development is concerned. Hey, this has been a great interview, a great episode for IT Time. Dr. Kristin Tolle, the Director of Natural Interaction in the Microsoft Research Connections team, and Chris Wendt, the Principal Group Program Manager for Research and Machine Translation. Great topic. It's amazing what we're doing out there in research and technology. With that, where would we go and find the Microsoft Hub Translator?
It's actually at http://hub.microsofttranslator.com.
And if you want to use the API, you can go to api.microsofttranslator.com.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, thanks, Kristin, Dr. Kristin Tolle and Chris Wendt. You guys are awesome. Love to have you back on IT Time sometime.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Love to come back.
So with that, it's a wrap.